Hello everybody. Today we are going to answer the question, can Donald Trump run for a third term as president? He has expressed interest many times over the past several years in being president for more than 2 terms. However, can he actually do this? It's time for a history lesson. Presidents being limited to 2 terms stems from the first president, George Washington. Washington willingly chose not to run for a third term because he wanted to set the precedent that no man should be president forever. He may have also just been tired. The dude won the Revolutionary War and then was begged into being president. However, George could have gone on being president for more terms. There were no term limits for presidents expressed in the Constitution at that time. In general, almost all presidents after Washington followed his precedent. While many of them did not actually live through 1 or 2 full terms, those that did were never president for more than 2 terms. Theodore Roosevelt served 2 terms as president, and while the people wanted him to run for 4 more years, he declined, respecting the limits on power. However, when Taft, Roosevelt's successor, turned out to be not that great, Theodore Roosevelt ran for a 3rd term in the 1912 election. The Republican Party was not too keen on making them their candidate, so they stuck with Taft. Meanwhile, Roosevelt created the more progressive Bold Moose Party. What ended up happening is that Taft and Roosevelt split the Republican vote, and Democrat Woodrow Wilson won the presidency. So far, while some presidents have attempted it, no president has been able to serve for more than 2 terms, except for one. The man in the wheelchair and distant cousin of Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. FDR was elected president 4 times. It's not very surprising that he was able to get elected 4 times, as he was the one that got the country out of the Great Depression and led everyone through World War II. He was a good president at a time when the country needed stability. However, he died just a few months into his 4th term, and his vice president, Harry Truman, took over to serve the rest of the term. FDR was allowed to do this because there were no limits in the Constitution on the number of terms a president is allowed to serve as president. However, shortly after FDR, in 1951, the 22nd Amendment would be ratified. This amendment specifically states that no person shall be elected to the office of president more than twice, and no person who has held the office of president or acted as president for more than 2 years of a term to which some other person was elected president shall be elected to the office of president more than once. So what exactly does this mean? Well, the first part, no person can be elected more than twice. Ergo, one cannot serve as president for more than 2 terms. What about that next part? One about being elected president during someone else's term? Kind of nonsense. Essentially, if you were vice president and the president died, resigned, or was impeached in the first 2 years of their term, and you assumed the role and office of the presidency, you may only be elected 1 time. If you become president in the second half of the term, you can be elected 2 times. Therefore, the absolute amount of time a person can be president if they were VP and the president's office became vacant in the second half of the term and they were re-elected twice is 10 years. Also, one thing I find funny about this amendment is that they included an exemption for Harry Truman. He assumed office in the first half of the term, which would have made him ineligible to be elected 2 more times. However, they included a little exemption for him. But in the end, he was only elected 1 more time. So looking at this, it seems like Trump is shit out of luck. However, there may be some paths to a 3rd term. The 22nd Amendment says nothing about consecutive terms. It's a weak argument, but one could argue that the 2 terms the amendment is referring to are 2 consecutive terms, not just 2 terms. And since Trump's 2 terms were broken up, it might work, but probably not. The fact that the amendment says nothing about an exemption for non-consecutive terms kind of undermines this entire argument. Next option. Could Trump run as VP and then have the president resign and Trump takes over? For example, could Trump be Vance's VP, and as soon as Vance is inaugurated, he resigns and Trump takes over per the 25th Amendment? This one seems slightly more possible on the surface. The 22nd Amendment doesn't have anything to say about being elected to the office of the vice president. However, the 12th Amendment does. The 12th Amendment was created to reform the way the president and vice president were elected. Essentially, before it, whoever got the most electoral votes became president, and whoever came in second place became VP. The 12th Amendment changed it so that the president and VP were separate elections in the Electoral College, so they could be from the same party and run together. Anyway, in that amendment, it states that no person constitutionally ineligible to the office of president shall be eligible to that of vice president of the United States. Since the VP may have to take over as president, they need to be eligible, such as being a natural born citizen, being 35 years old or older, and as per the 22nd Amendment, not having already served 2 terms as president. Option 2 is a no-go. Some have speculated that Trump could claim his original 2 terms were incomplete or invalid or whatever, meaning that he is still technically allowed to serve more terms, but the courts will decide on that, and I doubt they'll rule in his favor. What about if he was elected Speaker of the House? Technically, the Speaker does not have to be a member of Congress, and if Trump was elected, the President and VP could resign, and as per the 25th Amendment, Trump would become President. This is unlikely as he may be blocked by the Supreme Court, and Republicans would have to win the House to elect him as Speaker. Same goes if Trump tries to go down the list of presidential succession. The President pro tempore of the Senate is next, and they have to be a senator, so Trump can't be that. If he wants to take a cabinet position, the Republicans would need to win the presidency and the Senate for the confirmations, which would be difficult but not impossible. If they do that, they could confirm Trump as Secretary of State, for example, and then everyone in front of him resigns and he moves up. It would look a little something like this. Republicans have control in the White House and both chambers of Congress. The President nominates Trump as Secretary of State since that's the closest cabinet position to the President in the line of succession. The President resigns, then the VP, then the Speaker, and the pro tempore of the Senate. And then Trump accepts the presidency, assuming the courts allow it, which they probably won't. Also, assuming the public allows it, since this scheme would almost certainly be public knowledge, and people may not be too keen on Trump scamming his way into the presidency like this. A few problems though. 1, the courts may just block it. 2, the Republicans would need both chambers of Congress as they would need the Speaker of the House and the President pro tempore of the Senate to play ball. And 3, what if one person just decides not to go with the plan? What if the Republicans are able to pull off this harebrained scheme and the courts allow it? And they're going down the list, the President resigns, then the VP, then the Speaker, and then the pro tempore of the Senate, who would be in front of Trump, just decides, fuck it, I'm President now. That would be pretty funny. But also, this whole scenario is damn near impossible. Now time for the only real way Trump can run for a 3rd term. Change the rules. If he can push through an amendment to the Constitution, getting rid of term limits for the president, then he can surely be elected for a 3rd term. Unfortunately for him, given today's political climate and the incredibly high bar needed to amend the Constitution, this is very unlikely. So to answer the original question, can Donald Trump run for a 3rd term? Probably not.